children are naturally curious and children have a natural sense of wonder. And we need to encourage that for as long as humanly possible and to kind of foster that for as long as humanly possible. And homeschooling gives you a unique opportunity to do that. Schools, they can't do that. With the best intention of the world, they can't do that. If you have 20-something children in a classroom and you're teaching to various levels, some of them get it real quickly, some of them don't. Sometimes the material is just not interesting to a bunch of them. You can't do that.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Crab and the Cross podcast. I'm your host, Mary Rose, and my guest today is Mary Ellen Barrett, a longtime Catholic homeschooling mom who is also a blogger and a podcaster and the editor of Seton Magazine for Seton Home Study program. I've been trying to explore topics pertaining to Catholic education this season, and so it seems only fitting to bring a Catholic homeschool mom into the mix. I was never homeschooled. I have no real affiliation with homeschooling, and so it was interesting to just pick her brain and kind of find out what it's really like to homeschool. And it's funny because I think because going to school, like an outside school, is the norm in this day and age in our country, homeschooling sounds so unnatural the first time you hear about it. But as she describes it, it sounds like just completely natural because there's just this seamlessness between family life and education. I think it's tempting in these kinds of conversations to try to find that silver bullet, that one mode of education that will guarantee that your children will become intelligent, well-rounded, faithful Catholics. There are certainly a multitude of environments that children can flourish in. I don't think that education is the deciding factor necessarily. I mean, I have friends who went to public school all their lives, friends who went to Catholic school all their lives, friends who were homeschooled all their lives up until college, who have all turned out to be intelligent, well-rounded, faithful, practicing Catholics. I also know people who were educated in all of the above ways who totally rejected the faith or totally rejected the ideals of their parents and have kind of made their own way through life. Human beings are free beings who are shaped by family environments, social environments, and cultural environments. And we can be influenced by all of these factors. And it's obviously not going to work to just completely isolate your child from any type of factor that would, pose like a negative influence on them. But it's a tricky thing because I understand you want to protect your children from harm, from evil, and you also want to set them up for the best possible circumstances in life. I have no kids, so I don't really have any wisdom to share in that regard, but I do think just from observation that there's no guaranteed input-output. Here are the results you get. And also I think the challenge too is Catholic school is not a monolithic thing. Public school is not a monolithic thing. It depends on where you live in the country, what the, community environment is like, what's the size of the school, and even down to the specifics of who their classroom teacher is. I had some incredible classroom teachers in public elementary school, but I might have had a different outcome if I had, been with one of the other teachers for the same grade. So I think that's the beauty of using your God-given gifts of wisdom and discernment to make those decisions for your child, for your family, weighing all the factors. Sometimes we almost want somebody to give us the perfect textbook answers so that we can just follow it and not have to worry about unforeseen consequences. But I don't think it works like that, at least not in most areas of life. I think God gives us the moral law, which in and of itself is a lot to adhere to. But outside of that, there's a lot of freedom to cultivate a particular life for ourselves and for our children. So best of luck to all the parents out there making those hard decisions. I may look back on this, years from now when I have kids and have other thoughts to say. But for now, that's kind of my take. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Definitely check out Mary Ellen's blog and podcast if you're interested in homeschooling your children and learning more. And if you enjoy this podcast, please make sure you are subscribed, rate, review, and follow on social media. And now here's my conversation with Mary Ellen Barrett. Mary Ellen Barrett is the editor of Seton Magazine and the director of special projects for Seton Home Study. She lives in Long Island, New York with her husband David and their 7 children, ages 14 to 26. She blogs at Tales from the Bonny Blue House and her Substack, The Thing with Feathers, and she co-hosts the podcast Stay at Home School Mom Podcast with Ginny Seufert. Mary Ellen, thank you so much for joining me today.
I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Is school currently in session for your kids who are still at that age?
Yes, I still have 3 left to homeschool, and we started about 3 weeks ago.
Okay. So they're hard at work while you're recording this interview.
Well, they're doing something. They tend to be less hard at work when I'm not sitting there.
I can't imagine why.
They'll make it look good when I come into the room.
Right. Right. So as I was telling you before we started, I've been trying to explore some different models of education. I know that I have a lot of friends who have young kids that are not quite school age yet, and they're all trying to decide, how are we going to school our kids? We want to make sure that we instill the faith in our kids. We want them to grow up in a good environment, but we also want them to, actually learn things. And there's just, I think, a lot of tension right now for Catholics trying to decide between Catholic school, homeschool, and even public school in some places. And so I want to talk to somebody who's a veteran homeschooler who has thought a lot about it. And so I'm grateful for you to join me today.
Yeah, these are difficult decisions for young families to make. There's a lot involved in making those decisions. Right. And I made it a very long time ago.
Yeah. So what was kind of your impetus for making the decision to become a full-time, as your podcast says, stay-at-home school mom?
So it was about 2000, the year 2000, and my oldest son had he was a high-functioning, he was on the spectrum of autism. Mm-hmm. At the time, they diagnosed him as, they changed these diagnoses all the time, but it was PPT, PBD-NOS, and he was in a self-contained classroom, and he was in 3rd grade, and he was starting to pick up some abnormalities of other children who were less functioning than he was. And he was also getting teased a lot and picked on by mainstream kids because they were mainstreaming him into some classrooms, and he wasn't actually capable. He had a fairly low IQ, and he wasn't really capable of some of the academics that they were pushing on him. And I went to an IEP meeting, which is an individual instruction plan meeting, and they were going to promote him into the 4th grade, but he really wasn't even doing 3rd grade work very well. And I said, well, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. And they said, well, it'll be all right. It'll be all right. And I didn't think it was going to be all right at all. And so I came home, and my friend said, why don't you try homeschooling him for a year? And I said, well, that sounds just really weird to me. But it did. And I had my younger daughter, my next in line, was in the Catholic school in 1st grade. Mm-hmm. And then I had another little one who was pre-K age, but she was only going 1 day a week to the Catholic school. And so I said, well, all right. So she took me to a homeschool event, like where the kids were all playing outside. It was like in a field. And now Ryan, my son, he was odd because he had odd behaviors, and he twitched and he rocked and he did other things. But I mean, he was friendly. He was a friendly kid. So we went to this thing, and I was catching up with a friend who I didn't know homeschool. I hadn't seen since college. We just happened to meet at this thing, and I was like, oh, you homeschool? What's that like? And she had babies and kids my age. And so I'm doing that glance around, and there's my son Ryan playing Red Rover with a bunch of boys. And I was like, oh, he's playing. Like nobody ever invited Ryan to play it before.
Yeah.
He had never had a friend. Nobody ever, like he was always that weird kid in the corner. So I was almost in tears. I was so happy. And he was so like excited when he was in the car. He had made these friends, and there was this kid Paul, and there was this kid Andrew, and there was all these kids. So I said to my husband, we have to do this. And he said, this sounds really weird to me. I don't know if we can do this. But we prayed about it. We thought about it. We talked to people, and we said, all right, we can do this for a year. And if we don't ruin everybody's life in a year, we can, we'll reevaluate.
Yeah.
How much damage can you do in 1 year?
Sure.
And he blossomed. He had friends. Wow. He caught up in some subjects, because it's one-on-one instruction. And I pulled my other two out. And since then, nobody's gone to school until they went to college. And it just worked for our family. So it was a lifestyle, though. I mean, you homeschool, it's a lifestyle. It's not something you do like from 7 to 3 or something. It becomes your whole life.
Right. So when you started, your oldest son, he was in like third-ish, fourth grade.
It's going into fourth grade.
Going into fourth grade. Okay. And were you solely the sole instructor, or did you do like a co-op, or?
I was the sole instructor for a few years. We did a lot of homeschool activities. We didn't do any. I only joined a co-op when they got a little bit older. My younger kids got older. I started having babies like gangbusters there. And so it was hard to get out a lot,
Yeah, sure.
when you're constantly pregnant or nursing and stuff like that. So it was hard to commit to say going to a co-op and being at a class every Monday or every Wednesday. So, but I would join lots of things. The kids participated in what became a professional Shakespeare troupe for 14 years.
Wow.
So they performed, including Ryan, for 14 years until COVID shut it down. And they did all kinds of other kinds of performances and things like that. We tended toward the more fine arts, but then they also did soccer and Irish step dancing, and the kids all have gone through. I have a couple of black belts in karate. Like they've done the things that other school kids do too.
Right. And so did you initially like go with Seton curriculum, or did you do a lot of research? Did you create your own?
I initially went with Seton because way back then, they were about the only game in town that was Catholic and had lesson plans. And my background was not, I was an English lit major in college, but when I chose that major, my father said, "Oh, so you're going to teach?" And I said, "Oh, absolutely not. I'm not going to teach. That sounds awful." And I went investment banking. I worked for an investment bank for many years. So I wanted lesson plans, and they were the only ones that really had that. And so from the beginning, I was with Seton, and there were years I wasn't fully enrolled. You can enroll in Seton, and they do the grading, and they provide a transcript. And so there were years I kind of dabbled in my own thing, but I always came back to Seton because I'm one of those people who needs like structure and a rail to run on, and I'm just more my husband has words for it, but I like to say type A, So
Sure.
I like a rail to run on.
Yeah And so at the time, so the oldest was fourth grade, and then you had one who was like kindergarten, second grade. Okay. And then the kindergartner or so.
Yeah.
Okay. So then does that mean that you are every night, reviewing 3 separate lesson plans and getting ready for the next day?
Yes and no. So when you start out, any homeschool, whatever program you choose, or if you're doing it on your own, the kindergarten really only takes an hour of lesson time. And if you break that up during the day, if you're practicing writing your letters, or you're counting, or you're doing something like that, it feels like no time at all.
Yeah.
So I would review what I wanted to accomplish during the week with the kindergartner. And in between, you give them a amount of Play-Doh or some, crayons and coloring books and things like that. Second grade maybe takes 2 hours of actual lessons. So they get a spelling list and a couple of math problems, and you spend some time teaching. And then reading is really what you focus on teaching in those early grades, because once they can read fluently, you can kind of give them the work and say, okay, come to me when you have problems.
Yeah.
And so Ryan took up more of my time because he needed a lot more attention. And Seton, another thing, a reason why I chose them was because they had special services.
Oh,
so they
really?
Yes, they have, and they always have, and a lot of the big name curriculum providers do have this now. But Seton was the first one to have a special services division for children who don't learn typically. Okay. So if you have a child with learning disabilities or things like dyslexia or dysgraphia or things like that, they can address those issues.
Yeah. So when you say like for the second grader, there's only, 2 hours of learning time, does that mean that you sit down for, I guess 2 hours, maybe broken up throughout the day, and then the rest of the day they're free to play and explore? Or did you make it more structured than that?
I did. No, I didn't make it more structured than that. Yes, they were free to play. Very little screen time.
Yeah.
Very little screen time. And again, this is 20 something years ago, so there wasn't as much screen time available.
Right.
But I'd put a video on once in a while to be able to take a shower or cook dinner or something.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of outside time, and we went to the library a lot. We took a lot of nature walks. We met friends. I'd go to daily mass with them in the afternoon sometimes, and then we go to the park, things like that. So it left them a lot of freedom to be children. To just play.
Right. Yeah, because I taught high school for a number of years, but even just reflecting on my own time, I went to public school until 6th grade, and then I went to Catholic school. I mean, when you look back on it, a lot of the day is spent transitioning from one thing to the next, getting everybody quiet, giving the instructions. There's a lot of time where you're not actually taking in information or problem solving or figuring something out. You're just kind of doing procedures.
Right. So if you boil it down to actual academic instruction, it's not that much.
Right.
So it's individual tutoring, really. So that boils it down even more.
Yeah.
So if somebody gets it really quickly, I can walk away and let them complete the page. Or if they get it even quicker, say, all right, you've done 10 perfectly. Let's move on to the next lesson.
Yeah. Yeah. So then, that's with your first 3 children. You obviously had several more after that. I can just imagine then once you have another baby and they're very needy and you're feeding them constantly, did that make it difficult to then continue to educate your children simultaneously?
You would think it would, but actually I think it's easier to have them home to help with the baby than to try to get everybody out the door and packing lunches and, oh gosh, I need an empty peanut butter jar and sign these papers.
Yeah.
It just, like I said, it becomes your lifestyle. So the siblings have very close relationships.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean they don't bicker and they don't fight. They're normal siblings. They drive each other crazy. They drive me crazy. But they are perfectly willing to change a diaper or hold a baby or, go clean up this mess or, that kind of thing, because so much living goes on at home that this is just what we do. So when my daughter, Katie, my oldest daughter, Katie, she was in 5th grade. So there's a very excellent Catholic school here that has a Latin school. So it's 6th to 8th grade, and then they have a high school. And it's about the only school I would ever consider for my children. And so she wanted to go. So we went through this whole application process, and she got in, and I paid the deposit and I bought the ugly uniform and the whole thing. And then I found out I was expecting twins.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. And so she begged me to not go because she wanted to stay home and be with the babies.
Wow.
And so I said, all right, well, that's, a few $100s I'll never see again. So that uniform stayed in my attic for I don't know how many years.
Halloween costume.
Every so often I'd say, see what I did? But she just couldn't bear to be away from new siblings. And so in some ways they're so close. And it was easy for me because I would just, if I had to do something or if I had to teach somebody and the 2-year-old was fussing, I'd say, all right, go play with the 2-year-old for a little while I take care of this one with their math, and I'll get to you when, so, I'm not saying it was idyllic. It wasn't. It was sometimes very stressful, and there were many pizzas for dinner and a sticky kitchen floor for weeks on end. But the important part was that we were close as a family.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I guess kind of the downside of that people often bring up, I mean, not that there's a true downside of being close with your family, but there becomes a question of like, what about social skills, and do they interact well with other kids and play well with other kids? So, I mean, you mentioned they did karate and soccer and other things. Like, did you find that some of their social skills were stunted and you had to kind of push them, or was it all very natural? Like, talk a little bit about the social side of things.
I love when people ask me about this. This is one of the things I get asked to speak about a lot and at conferences and things. It's so funny. A few years ago, I had my twins at the library, and they're 17 now. So maybe they were 12.
Yeah.
And some lady was speaking to them, and I just kind of walked over because Bridget looked stressed, and I said, "Hi." And she said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I was just talking to your daughter. I found out she was homeschooled, and I just had to learn all about it." And I said, "Oh, okay. Is everything all right?" And she says, "Well, yes." She said, I'm just very concerned about socialization. I teach in the public school, and I was just very concerned. I said, "Well, was she speaking to you? Was she telling you what it was about?" She goes, "Yes. Oh, yes. She's very polite. She spoke very nicely." I said, "Well, isn't that socialization?" She went, "Oh." She got a little flustered. And I guess that's my point. Yes, yeah. They do they socialize with a vast age group from a very early age. Our homeschooling group, I was the 25th family to join.
Wow.
There are over 350 families in it now.
Oh,
and
my
that's
gosh.
that's just our Catholic homeschool group. It grew very quickly, first because I live in New York, and there was a vaccine mandate passed, I want to say 2018, that no child could go to school without having been vaccinated. And a lot of people were anti-vax, and so they started homeschooling. So we got a big influx of people then. And then, of course, COVID happened, and people started homeschooling, and some people just, stuck with it.
Right.
And we have a very big secular group, and we have a huge Christian group on Long Island. So when we have a homeschool group activity, if we all are participating in a field day, or if there's a co-op, or if there's a play tryout or a talent show, they're with kids from all age groups.
Yeah.
And they kind of grow up together. Right. So the socialization happens that way. And my kids have gone to classes at science museums. They have participated. I have a daughter who's a professional musician. So she has been playing in orchestras since she was 6 years old. She's played at Carnegie Hall.
Wow.
I mean, she's had great opportunities to play with some of the best musicians in the country. That's socialization.
Yeah.
So yes, they are well socialized, but yes, it was me having to make those opportunities happen. I could have locked them in a closet,
sure,
and just never left the house, but that wouldn't have been serving them well, and that wouldn't have been serving God well. He gave them to me to educate them the best way that I could. My husband and I. When I say me, I am including him in that. It's like the royal we.
Yeah.
He had a lot to do with this too. So that was part of my mission, was to make them functional human beings. And to do that, you have to leave the house.
Now, when you say homeschooling group, are these all people who are doing Seton together, or all different programs, and they're somehow form this coalition?
Yeah, it's all different methods of homeschooling. Not everybody uses Seton.
Okay.
Some people do their own thing. Some people use Mother of Divine Grace. Some people use Colby's. Some people have different philosophies of it. Some people use, there's an online school called Homeschool Connections. It has nothing to do with philosophy. It's more about our faith that brings us together.
Okay, so these are all Catholic families?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, I mean, how does that work? Like, is there someone who's in charge of it? Is there a space that you collectively share? Like, what's just sort of the logistics of having a big homeschool group like that?
The logistics are a little hairy. It used to be, and you might be too young to remember these, Yahoo email groups. That's where it started, like when I first belonged to it. So we would email each other, and we still have I think it's an IO email group now, and a Facebook group. And that's how we communicate. Oh, so-and-so booked this museum class at this time. Who wants to sign up? This is how much it is. And then we all go to that. We don't have one specific meeting place for the whole group.
Okay.
There are I want to say 4 different co-ops going on right now. So people will pick the one that has the philosophy or the classes or the location that's most convenient to them. And if they choose to attend a co-op, that's what they go to. So some of them are, I'm gonna start going to one that's about 40 minutes away for my youngest. He's going to take a public speaking class at that one because he hasn't, because of COVID, a lot of the stuff where he would have opportunities for that kind of thing didn't happen.
Right.
So he's going to start going to that. There are 3 or 4 other ones that I know of around. So it just depends on, there are so many different things going on all over Long Island. So it depends on what you want to do. You can participate as little or as much as you want to.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've obviously been involved for decades now, but if there's like a young family in your area who's just getting started, like, are they essentially finding out about you all through Facebook groups or through just mutual friends? Like, is there a way that people get connected to these sorts of things?
Yeah, that can be overwhelming to try to figure out. People do tend to find us on Facebook or through their parishes sometimes, or somebody they know knows somebody they know, or they Google Catholic homeschooling Long Island. And myself or some of the other women who've done public speaking about it will pop up, and I get an email or a text message or something like that.
Okay. So it's not this super formalized thing like we're this group and you have to, like, you know, gain entry into our group through.
Oh, goodness, no. No, it's nothing like that. Please just, find me on Facebook if you're on Long Island and want to join. It's not at all formal. If you want to join our email group, the only thing is we have one lady who moderates it, and she asked that she gets to give you a phone call just because we've had people who come on and like spam us with weird things and stuff like that. You're always open to some kind of nasty behavior. So we just ask that somebody allow Alice to call them, and just to make sure that they're actually a legitimate person.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
So for people who aren't really clear on like the terminology, what is a homeschool co-op? Like, how is that different from homeschooling in your house, send them to a small school? Like, what does that mean?
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of different terms now. A co-op generally means when a bunch of homeschool families get together and rent or acquire some space, usually in an empty Catholic school, something like that. And moms or dads will take it upon themselves to teach different classes. Usually they're enrichment classes, maybe literature or music or art or something like that. Or it'll be, in my case, I usually used to sign up for a lot of science classes. We had a couple of different biology classes. We had some wonderful nurses and doctors and naturalists in our group who would dissect things. I didn't want like a cow eyeball in my house or a fetal pig. I just didn't want one in my fridge.
Right.
So but those are required kind of things. So I would sign up for those kinds of classes. So it would be parents who took it upon themselves to do this and would give classes like that.
Okay.
I teach one in, I teach literature classes, usually in mystery fiction, because that's just something I enjoy reading. So I like to share that knowledge with kids. So I'm teaching the Father Brown mysteries to middle schoolers. Yeah, it's a fun thing. And there's also hybrid schools where I'm
hearing this more and more. I don't know if that's a more of a new term or.
It seems to be kind of new. It's like it's really come into its own like in the last 5 years, where they'll buy, say, like a Seton program. And they'll meet for 2 or 3 days a week and teach. And then the other 2 days, the children are home.
Okay.
And they get the homework to complete on those 2 days. So that's kind of hybrid schooling, where you're in 2 or 3 days and home 2 or 3 days.
Okay. But with the co-ops, like, since you said it's more enrichment, are they doing like Seton or whatever at their house, and then they're gathering together to just do something that's not like for a grade or for a course credit?
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. That's so interesting, because it's kind of like people just I don't know, I guess sharing their talents or sharing their knowledge like for its own sake, Yeah. There's something kind of like refreshing about that, where, because I think, I mean, just because I taught for 8 years Catholic high school, and I think the students, they they realize that there's a lot of busy work in school, or you're just doing certain things to, like, they see it all as a means to an end. They're like, I need to get a good grade in this class so I can have a good GPA, so I can get into a good college, so I can get a good job, so I can make good a salary, and there's not really like this love of learning, I think, that often gets instilled, except for the ones who are just very naturally curious, and I think, like, even the school I worked at, they would try to have these kind of enrichment periods during the day where it wasn't a class, you just could go and learn. But the students never took it seriously. It was just a time to relax and, skip if they could. And so, I don't know. I think that's a challenge is like, how can you help people to, like, obviously learn, but also just to enjoy learning and not see learning as something that's confined to a school and you stop doing it once you get the terminal degree.
Yeah, it's a big deal in the homeschooling community. All homeschoolers that I've ever met, Catholic, Christian, secular, whatever their philosophy is that children are naturally curious and children have a natural sense of wonder.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
we need to encourage that for as long as humanly possible.
Right.
And to kind of foster that for as long as humanly possible. And homeschooling gives you a unique opportunity to do that. Yeah. So schools, they can't do that. With the best intention of the world, they can't do that. If you have 20-something children in a classroom and you're teaching to various levels, some of them get it real quickly, some of them don't. Sometimes the material is just not interesting to a bunch of them. You can't do that. But homeschooling can. You can kind of be led by their interests a little bit, or you can take them to a place where somebody who's wildly passionate about a subject that you're not going to find in a school will teach them about it. Now, some co-ops are set up, and I've done this like with the biology thing, where you have somebody who will put in the credit hours of teaching it and sign off that you've done this, that, and the other thing. And some school districts will accept that as a credit hour for a high school class. I mean, it's a lot more work for that teacher. But by and large, it's a lot of work. But by and large, it's mostly about something that they just want, they love, and they want to share with you. And then sometimes you'll get a kid who just is just, you see that spark and they're like, wow, yeah, this is amazing. And they may do nothing with it, or they may grow up and do something amazing with it. So, and that's what every teacher wants, right? Every teacher in every school and every situation wants that. We just have a broader opportunity to do it. Yeah,
no, absolutely. Do you find that a lot of the parents involved in your co-op that you've gotten to know, did they start homeschooling from the get-go, or a lot of them, like, they sent their kids to public school, or maybe they sent their kids to Catholic school and they saw issues and then they pulled them out?
I have seen a lot of both. Most of my friends started from the get-go, like planned to do this when they had children.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And a few friends just weren't satisfied with the school.
Yeah.
And now since COVID, we have a lot of people who, like, their eyes were opened. I keep in mind, I live in New York.
Sure. Yeah.
Which is like a different animal than, other places.
Yeah.
And once your eyes are opened, it's hard to shut them about what's going on in some of these schools. So, and they found that, I actually can do this. And what I'm providing is better than what they were getting.
Yeah.
Or they found out their kids were more behind than they thought they were, and they were able to catch them up. And so maybe we can continue this.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm in Maryland, so, we're like the litigious capital of the country, I think. But I'm sure it's pretty similar in New York. But I mean, do you find, I think this is the concern that's starting to grow amongst people, is that, like, as homeschooling becomes more and more, I guess popular, for lack of a better word, like, that local governments are going to start sort of cracking down or having their hands more involved, or have you noticed, have you seen any of that? Like, is there any sort of oversight that you're getting from, government in New York?
Not so well. New York, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, North Dakota are very difficult states to homeschool in, meaning that they require the most paperwork. They have the most oversight. Yes.
And who's the paperwork coming from? Like, who's like mailing you something?
Well, see, and that's another weird thing. Like, for example, in New York, the state requires a certain amount of, I have to submit a letter of intent, and then they send me something, a request for an IHIP, individual home instruction plan. I have 10 days to respond.
Wow.
I send them my IHIP. They have 10 days to respond to me to say, yes, we accept it, or no, we don't. I am never on time with mine. They are never on time with theirs in my school district. And we're all very friendly about it. And then I have to submit quarterly reports. And then every other year up until 8th grade, I have to give them standardized tests. And on alternate years, I write an assessment of what the children have done.
Oh, wow.
That's a lot of paperwork.
Yeah.
Fine. Okay. That's my school district. The next school district over, 1.5 miles from me, they don't have to do anything.
Really? Okay.
Absolutely nothing.
Wow. So, I mean,
I can't explain it to you. It makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I just know nothing about this. So, I mean, is there, like, let's just say hypothetically, you know, someone in your school district, parents just decided that they're going to homeschool their kids. They never even went to school, you know, pre-K, kindergarten. They're just going to start homeschooling them. Like, who do they report to, or like who finds out about them and then contacts them? Like, what's that sort of chain of command?
Well, if they were going to do it correctly, they would then send a letter of intent to the superintendent of schools. If they did absolutely nothing, I don't know how anybody would find out. I mean, eventually somebody might.
Right. Yeah.
I don't think anybody'd be out looking for them.
Sure. Okay. But I guess that's a question of just, it's probably varied wherever you live. So there's no sort of universal answer that you can say for like, here's how you legally homeschool your kids.
No, it's legal in all 50 states.
Okay.
But some states like Texas, Illinois, you don't have to report at all. You never have to tell them. Yeah, there's no letter of intent. There's nothing like that. So there are quite a few states like that.
Okay. So
which
then
makes it hard to see how it's growing. But in the states that report homeschooling, it's grown something like 7 or 8% in the last few years, which when you consider how many millions of children that is, that's a pretty significant growth.
Right. Wow. So obviously, you know, you've been with Seton for a long time. You edit their magazine, so I'm sure you have, you know, a kind of a bias towards them. But for some of there's, you know, you mentioned Colby, you've mentioned, you know, Mother of Divine Grace. Like, can you explain a little bit about maybe the differences between some of these Catholic curriculum models, like to the extent that you know, and like how a family might make the most informed choice about what's best for their kids?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'm a little bit pro Seton because that really suits my style. It's very scholastic. It's very kind of book-driven, workbook-driven, very kind of repetitive learning, that kind of thing, which I know is not in fashion, but that's the way I was taught, and it worked out okay for me. And I was familiar with it. So that was easy for me to make that decision. Mother of Divine Grace is what's called a classical school. Okay. So they place a lot of emphasis on the learning trivium, grammar, rhetoric, logic, that. They do a lot of, the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans. They do a lot of mythology and stuff like that. It's a lovely curriculum started by a perfectly wonderful woman called Laura Berquist. Met her several times. She's terrific. She's still very involved with the school. Okay. And so you also get a counselor with that curriculum. So you get a little bit of help. With Seton, you get counseling too.
Counseling as in for the student, like school counselor, or someone to help you as the parent?
Somebody to help you as the parent. Okay. So say you get a little stuck or you're overwhelmed or you're not quite sure how to present a lesson, you can give somebody a call and say, hey, let me know. And they help you through it. They walk you through that kind of thing. Colby, I'm not as familiar with. They're kind of leaned more toward the classical side. And they have live online classes, and they also have book learning where you just get the stuff at home and you do it self-paced. So I'm not as familiar with that, but I know people really like it. They're based in California, and they're, I believe, an umbrella school there, which is they have a legal obligation to do that. I'm not familiar with the laws there. You'd have to, somebody who's interested in that would have to look that up because I don't want to say anything wrong. and they accept a lot of credits from other schools too, whereas I don't think Mother of Divine Grace does, and Seton does, but there are a lot of requirements to do so. They'll accept outside classes in certain subjects. So, but Colby takes a lot of outside classes too. So you get a diploma from them. There's a lot of more flexibility there.
Okay.
So those are like the three main ones.
Okay.
And then there are some smaller ones, and it all depends on what your philosophy is on homeschooling and how you like to teach and what kind of books you want to provide for your children, and how much support you want from the school, like how much support you need. If you want grading, if you want counseling, if you want to do all that yourself, if you want it very literary, or if you just want to put them in front of the workbooks and have them learn that way. So you kind of have to figure that all out.
Yeah. Now, just if somebody were to like go rogue and just create their own homeschool program, when it came time for if their child wanted to apply to college, would they be having to take a GED exam, or do you have any idea how that works?
That is actually getting so much easier. Yes, okay. You can write your own transcript. I have written my own transcripts because the daughter who's the musician, she took a lot of fine arts kind of classes and orchestras and stuff. So that I wanted that on her transcript. And she did in New York State have to take a GED, which is called the TASC exam. That year, she and several others took the TASC exam and got perfect scores. And so many of the colleges that they had to take them for stopped requiring it of homeschool students after that. Yeah, it's funny. She was annoyed. Right.
Well, yeah. She's like, what a waste.
It's like this 2-day long, 8-hour exam. It was like a pain in the neck. But so some colleges may still require it, but you can make your own transcript. A lot of colleges will accept that now. It's much easier. What my advice would be is starting in, say, the end of sophomore year, start to figure out what college you're interested in applying to and find out what their requirements are for homeschoolers. Early. Yeah. And start working on that transcript. There's an organization called HSLDA. It's the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. And they have lots of examples of transcripts on their website for free. You can join them. I think it's $100 for the year. And they have tons of information about the laws in each state for homeschooling. Yeah. But they also have a lot of free information about transcripts, and they have templates of them. You can actually print them off and like make your own, that kind of thing. So that's a very good source of that kind of information. Okay.
Interesting. Now, one of the other criticisms of homeschooling that I hear is that the kids just tend to be really bad at math.
No public school kids are bad at math. So
exactly. Well, I think that's the perfect rebuttal, because we're all actually really bad at math right now.
I'm quite terrible at it.
Yeah. But yeah, not a lot of people, unless you're at a STEM school, you're probably not excelling.
I married a CPA, so I would never have to balance my checkbook again.
Yeah.
I just think that some people are bad at math and some people are great at it. And so homeschoolers have access to the same things that other people have. You can hire a tutor, you can look at a YouTube video, you can, all those kinds of things.
But have you found that they have courses that go up to like calculus, should a student be on that level?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. I know a lot of, definitely. I know a lot of kids who've taken calculus and very high advanced math. And I know a couple of homeschool students who went to MIT. I know a couple who've gone to medical school. I mean, that's not a problem.
Yeah. One other thing I was wondering too is, and this, this might not be an issue for people who are deciding between Catholic school and homeschooling, but, I know for a lot of people, it's tight money wise in terms of living on a single income. And so did you find that, with you, I don't know, you said you were working prior, or were you only working prior to having kids?
I worked prior to having children, and then I took years off. I only started really working full time about 5 or 6 years ago.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, single
income for a lot of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you have any sort of tips or advice for families that are wanting to stay at home homeschool, which means they're going to be on a single income? And, it often tends to be too that people who homeschool have several children. So
yeah. I mean, finances are always a consideration, and they're always difficult. My husband has worked very, very hard at 2 jobs for a long time.
Yeah.
To provide, and sometimes staying at home can be more frugal in some ways. If you're sending your children to Catholic school and you're working just to do that,
right,
then homeschooling might be a viable option for you. I cook 3 meals a day, or I provide 3 meals a day. I shop very frugally. I mean, groceries lately are just
oh gosh, I know.
It's just ridiculous.
It is.
It's just ridiculous. But I'm not paying for me to commute. I'm not paying for daycare or any kind of babysitting. Well, when my children were younger, I wasn't. In our homeschool group, we shared as many resources as we could. Taking advantage of the thrift store, so buying things used, that kind of thing. I mean, there are always ways to cut corners for things that you want. I've never been somebody who hits Starbucks 3 times a week.
Right.
Things like that. I mean, there's always a way to find the money that you need for what you want. And I really do think God blesses our efforts for these kinds of things. Like we always found that when we were just like, okay, another baby's coming, and God provided, there was always a little raise or a bonus or something. It was always like a sign like, yes, you're doing the right thing. So I think if we kind of step out and trust, and so many of us are so fearful, especially in this economy. I get it. Believe me, I get it. It's hard. It's really hard to step out and trust. But if you do, I think God blesses those efforts. I really do.
Yeah. No, I mean, absolutely. Have any of your kids at any point said, Mom, I really want to go to regular school?
No.
Okay.
Really? And I've offered here and there.
Okay.
And I've threatened.
There you go.
No, I haven't. I really haven't. But I have watched that school bus go by and thought, oh, wow, please come back. There are always those days. We all have them.
Right.
But no, they really haven't ever asked to go to school. I've tried really hard to provide a good life for them here, and hopefully I have. I don't know.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Well, I mean, I think if they were miserable, they would. Kids usually let you know if they're miserable.
I guess so. Yeah. I mean, it's nobody's happy 100% of the time, and we've all had our days. But by and large, we've had a good lifestyle. We've been very blessed. We have been. Yeah.
No, that's wonderful. Well, this has been really informative. I'm like, I don't have kids yet, so I'm a total blank slate when it comes to homeschooling. And so I appreciate you just letting me like kind of pepper you with questions.
Oh, no, I'm happy to do this. This was great. Thank you so much. Anytime anybody wants to talk about homeschooling, I'm happy to do it. And anybody who has any questions, I'm easy to find on Facebook.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's actually where I found you. So for people who might be interested in following some of the work that you do, what are some things that they can find if they go to your blog?
If it's maryellenbarrett.com, and it goes back to, I think, 2007 when my children were very tiny. Yes.
Oh, wow.
So there's, you can go back there. It's not that well organized because people didn't back then.
Right.
Blogs weren't monetized or very fancy back then. And I'm just too old of a dog to learn that new trick. So, but there's a lot of stuff on there about homeschooling. And the newer Substack is more about the second half of life and stuff like that. But also on the podcast, the Stay at Home School Mom podcast, is where my friend Ginny and I combined 50 years of homeschooling experience, she and I.
Yeah.
So if you want to take a listen to that, we go into all like how you keep your house clean while homeschooling.
Yes. Do you have one for how you keep your house clean when you're a single woman with a dog and you're still okay?
It's the dog. I know. It's the dog that makes everything the mess.
I know. He never does the dishes.
Explain the dog.
Yeah.
But yeah, check out the podcast.
Okay.
That might be helpful.
Oh, definitely. Great. Well, great. Well, thank you again so much. And I look forward to hopefully talking with you in the future.
Thank you. God bless.
You too. Bye-bye. Awesome. Yay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I hope that went well for you.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I like to kind of keep things conversational. I had a couple questions that, friends are saying, make sure you ask her about this. So they're like a little more invested. Like I said, I'm a very blank slate, but like a lot of my friends are very much at that stage where they're like, okay, we got to make these decisions because the kids are like, 3 years old now. So.
Oh, okay. They don't have to decide yet.
Well, yeah. And I think it's good. Like you said, like you kind of were going to give it a trial year, So I
decide every year. Really,
yeah.
We do. We decide every year.
Yeah.
Well, now I'm right at the end, so
right.
This is what we're doing now.
Right. But yeah, I think people feel like every decision they make is going to be permanent, and I mean, with the exception of who you marry, that's probably the only super permanent decision.
When they're 4 or 5, or right up until what you do in second grade is not going to affect whether or not they go to Harvard. It's just not. So don't worry about it. Enjoy second grade.
Exactly.
It's going to be fine.